Welcome to our webinar looking at the two charterships that are run by the IES, Chartered Environmentalist and Chartered Scientist. About 5 minutes before we started this webinar, our webinar software kindly forced an upgrade on us. So I've had about 5 minutes before this started to try and get my head around the new layout. So apologies in advance if anything goes wrong. One of my more technologically astute colleagues will probably come join me if something goes wrong. So thanks for your interest in applying for chartership. My name's Adam Donnan. I'm the Chief Executive of the IES. I've worked for the organisation for about 13 years in various guises. And in 2014, I became the organisation's first Chief Executive. I am a chartered environmentalist myself. I'm not a chartered scientist, and that's because I've had no training in my past, no academic training in being a scientist. So the CEnv is a lot more suitable for me. Right from the off, we should probably say that we don't suggest that there is a hierarchy between our charterships. They are both of the same level. But today we'll give a dissection of the benefits of both charterships so that you can make an informed decision about which one is right for you. Now, this is an attempt to use the new software. So I have a poll running that I'm going to start off with, and you should see it appear on the screen now. The poll is asking at the beginning of the presentation which chartership you might be interested in doing. There is, of course, an option of both and don't know. I mean, your very attendance at this webinar may be because you don't know and you need to know, but it'd be interesting to see how that changes over the course of the webinar. Okay, so if I share the results with you, you'll see that 9 out of 21 attendees are looking to do CSci, 6 are doing CEnv, 4 are interested in both, and 2 don't know. It'd be interesting to see at the end of the webinar if that remains the same. So what is chartership? It's a phrase that we hear quite often related to various different organisations. So chartership comes about through something called a royal charter. It's a uniquely British concept, and as most things in the UK, there is a kind of old history to it. That's tied in with the monarchy. So the Royal Charter itself is awarded by the Privy Council, an organisation that some people might be familiar with through books like Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. So that gives you an idea of how long the Privy Council has been around for. They're there really to approve the standard of the chartership and to give external oversight for it. It all becomes a bit complicated because you can have chartered companies, you can have chartered organisations, and you can have charterships. And charterships are the qualifications. Some organisations that are chartered, like the Chartered Institute of Waste Management, most of their members are then called chartered members. But in our case, we don't have our own chartership. That's held by external organisations that then license the IES to award that chartership. And we'll go into a bit more detail about that later. So what is chartership? Really, it is a way of creating a point of difference between you and your competitors or colleagues. And it is an independent verification by other professionals in a peer review environment of your skills, knowledge, and behaviours. It's really what people work towards kind of post-university. You know, you get your degree, and then the next thing that you're really looking for, if you don't go and do a postgraduate, is how you work towards one of these charterships. So the benefits of undertaking a chartership is, for our field, that it is a contributing factor to proving that you're a competent expert, and that's particularly important in the EIA field, where regulations have changed recently, so you have to prove your own competencies. And chartership is one of a number of criteria that could be used to show that competence. And there's plenty of evidence that chartership improves your career prospects and employability. And there's a higher earning potential around chartership. So look out for our salary survey that will be published next month. We try and extract out of that data what the earnings of chartered members are versus other members, so you can get an idea of what that difference may be. It's also a useful demonstration of professional attitude, skills, competencies, ethics to your employers and clients. Some clients demand that on certain projects that a certain number of chartered individuals are involved in it. Sometimes you can put in a higher bid if you have more chartered employees working on a project. It enhances your own professional status, and it provides evidence that you are undertaking CPD, ongoing learning, and that's done through an audited process that I'll talk about in a bit more detail later. So an important benefit as well is that a lot of employers in the sector offer considerable financial and promotional incentives to become chartered. It might be worth, if you know of your own organisation offers a particular incentive to get chartered, just to type it in the message box for me now. I've talked to a few individuals who work for companies such as WSP and RSK, who both those companies I think offer a 1K bonus when you complete your chartership, so you can get your summer holiday paid for, as well as becoming more professionally qualified. I think Mark McDonald also do, but if your own organisation does offer an incentive, please let me know about it. There also is quite often promotional incentives, so certain organisations don't let an individual become senior without being chartered in some way. So to become a senior consultant, you need to be chartered. Glyn, it'd be interesting to know what organisation you work for that pays the 2K bonus. That's the highest one I've heard. So type in your organisation if you don't mind. So it is a confusing landscape for environmental professionals. There are, of course, the two charterships that the IS runs, Chartered Environmentalists and Chartered Scientists, but there are a series of other charterships out there. The other kind of umbrella chartership is called Chartered Engineer, but there's also kind of smaller charterships run by individual professional bodies such as Chartered Ecologist, Chartered Waste Manager, etc. And it depends on your motivations which one of these you will pursue. Whether you're looking for a small kind of bespoke chartership or one that has an element of portability and wider industry recognition. At the very top level, Chartered Environmentalist is about the application of sustainability and environmental technical knowledge to environmental practice. Chartered Scientist is about the application of scientific knowledge to environmental practice. Not in the broadest context, but in the context of the IES. So each one of these charterships are given their own flavour by the awarding body. So ours is very much about environmental science. So we have these two charterships because as the institution of environmental sciences, we feel that those two in combination recognise the skills of our membership. SWECO offer a 1,500 bonus and a salary increase up to 2,500. Thanks for that, Paul. So there you go. That shows the real kind of financial incentives to undertake a chartership. And I think those kind of prices are reflective of the value that employers and their clients place upon the chartership. So we're going to spend a while on this slide to go into some detail about what the difference between Chartered Environmentalists and Chartered Scientists may be, and to give you a framework for making that decision. So as mentioned, the main focus of CEnv is on sustainability, the main focus of CSci is on science, that's pretty obvious in the title of the chartership. To apply for either chartership, you need to be a full member or a fellow of the Institution of Environmental Sciences. In terms of experience, I said around 6 years because the IS works on a point system based on your academic and work experience. So that 6 years experience is diminished if you have a master's degree or a PhD. So if you have a master's degree, it's only 5 years experience that we require. The application processes themselves are slightly different, and I will go into more detail about this later. The CEnv application requires a report, a long-form CV, and always requires an interview, what we call the Professional Review Interview, or PRI, with 2 other practicing chartered environmentalists. The CSci, you have to submit a very similar report, again a long-form CV, in addition a CPD record for the last year, and sometimes we interview. So the interview isn't mandatory, it rather depends on how confident the assessors are in your report. If they have any doubts in their mind, they will call you to interview. I would say that we probably interview about 20% of the people who apply for chartered scientists. But I suspect that's going to creep up a bit over the next few years. I think we'll probably be aiming for about 50% of applicants. So the number of chartered environmentalists, and I'll show you later all of the different organisations that award both of these charterships. The total number of CEnvs is around 7,500, of which the IS contributes around 600 of those. Chartered scientist is slightly larger. There's 11,500 chartered scientists currently on the register, and slightly smaller for the IS. There's 315 of those come from the IS. Both charterships require the submission of an annual CPD record, of which we audit 10%. And if after being asked to submit that CPD, you refuse and can't have a good excuse for doing so, and there's lots of reasons why you might not do the CPD, like you might be on parental leave, you might be having a career break. All of those are very valid reasons, but if there's no valid reason, then you will lose your chartership. There is a bit of variability as well in the application costs, and that's reflective really of the interview element, the mandatory interview element of chartered environmentalist. So that's obviously carries a cost for the institution of getting two assessors down to the location and taking some time out of their day. And our support currently for CEnv is a little bit more involved, as you'll see later. So there is a price variability in the application cost, but then there's also a price variability in the annual cost. Martin asked about what numbers 592 and 315 are. So the first number is the total number of chartered environmentalists and chartered scientists in the world, you know, the number that are on the register held by Society for the Environment and the Science Council, and then the second numbers are the numbers that the IES contributes, so the number of people who are chartered through us currently. The second element of it is the annual cost. So we have to pay a subscription to those umbrella organisations for each of our chartered members, and that cost is reflective of the money that we pay them. So for chartered environmentalists, that's a bit less. And chartered scientists is a bit more, and that's just reflective of what the registration bodies charge, plus a small admin fee on our part for the processing of it. Currently, we have a workshop to support people applying for chartership, and I'll go in chartered environmentalists, and I'll go into a bit more detail about that later. We have one for CSci in development, and that will be launched in autumn of this year. Both of them have a code of ethics that chimes very well with the first one, so you're not really signing up to anything that you hadn't already signed up to with our code of conduct. And they have slightly different number of competencies. Competencies are the areas of skills, knowledge, and behaviours they have outlined that you need to align both your report and your interview to, and I shall go into a bit more detail about those in the future. So looking at those competencies, of which the report is based around, there is a slightly different focus to the two charterships. The A competencies, and there's a number of sub-competencies around there, and the best way to kind of look at this in real detail is just to download the two application forms off the IS website. Is that the CEnv is looking at sustainable development, problem analysis and methodology selection in the A's. CSci is looking at existing and emerging science and technology, and a real emphasis on uncertainty and making decisions based on uncertain data and gaps in the data. The B's of the charterships tend to move on to slightly more generic knowledge and behaviours, so a very strong emphasis right throughout chartered environmentalists on advocacy, the promotion of an environmental message, and the ability to change people's behaviour to strive for environmental solutions that go beyond compliance, and look at the leadership and management skills, very much the kind of generic element. That is echoed in Chartered Scientists, but in the C competencies. And Chartered Scientist focuses a bit more on kind of your responsibility for your team, your understanding of health and safety and regulatory requirements. So that is really, really very important in the scientific context, in the same way that being able to change behaviours is in the environmental context. Both of them have very similar C's, looking at kind of effective communication, the ability to talk to technical and non-technical audiences, and the ability to handle conflict, which is written as mediation really in Chartered Scientist. So those kind of high-level skills of recognising that in an environmental career you're likely to come across conflict, and it matters how the kind of personal skills that you have to be able to deal with that. And finally, they both end with the kind of professional ethics and practice bit of it. These all appear in D in CEnv, but D and E in CSci has slightly more competencies, and that looks at your understanding of professional development, that you are undertaking professional development, that you're reflecting on it, and that you have a plan for how you're going to develop in the future. A very interesting question in CEnv is your understanding of ethical dilemmas. That is a tricky question with some interesting answers from an assessor's point of view. That's one of the most interesting ones to read. And both of them ask for your understanding of a code of conduct. So there's quite a lot of similarity in the tail end of both charterships. The difference really is in the A's and B's, a difference of focus. So which is why sometimes when our men's undertaken one of the charterships, they choose to also undertake a second one. Other factors that you might consider when deciding between these charterships is the recognition of the chartership within the industry. I would probably say that Chartered Environmentalist has a slightly higher recognition within the environmental sector. It's a chartership that was designed for the sector, but CSci probably has a greater recognition internationally because of its larger membership and the fact that some of its members who are awarding Chartered Scientists are truly global organisations. And Chartered Scientist is recognised by the EU directive 2005/36/EC, which is a rather dull document, as most EU directives is, but it's around the portability of professional qualifications. It's about mutual recognition. So you can take Chartered Scientists to any country in Europe, and they could refer back to that directive and recognise it as a qualification. Post-Brexit, the mutual recognition of qualifications was mentioned in the draft withdrawal bill. It was seen to be a fairly low priority, but if we're heading towards a no-deal Brexit, that document will no longer apply. I don't know what the fate of the UK qualifications that are already on there will be. There may also, I think, be a greater portability to chartered scientists because it is this kind of cross-scientific recognized qualification. CEnv is that little bit narrower. It's about the environmental profession, but chartered scientist is about the whole scientific profession. And increasingly, a lot of careers exist on that kind of transboundary edge between, you know, chemistry and biology. Environmental scientists would be very familiar with this. So it does have that degree of portability around the sciences. Also, by joining one of those charterships, you are joining a wider community of chartered environmentalists or chartered scientists. I've mentioned a couple of times the registration organisation. So for chartered scientists, that's the Science Council, and for chartered environmentalists, it's the Society for the Environment. And those organisations provide some oversight of the qualification, but also some other services in addition to that. I have to declare an interest at this point. I am currently a trustee. I sit on the board of the Science Council, and in the past I went on secondment as a interim CEO of CEnv. So I'm familiar with both organisations, and I do have an interest in both of them. Science Council is it's considerably the larger organisation, both in terms of its registrants and its turnover. It's very keen on building a technician workforce, and has been doing a lot of work in that area over the last few years, funded from the Gatsby Foundation. Very interested as well in kind of cross-cutting issues for science. It's looking at the moment at things in the workforce data, the future of scientific careers. And it has membership right across the sciences and healthcare. The Society for the Environment is an organisation that the IES helped found. We were one of the 7 founding bodies of the Society, and we've had a bigger influence over the development of the standards. So we had a big influence over the development of CEnv. So it feels a little bit more like our qualification, I would say. Its membership, in terms of the professional bodies and learned societies that make up Society for the Environment, are a bit more focused on the environment and the built environment. And they run a series of additional services that may be more professionally relevant to an environmental scientist. So that's things like webinars and events. So they have a webinar series. They recently had one on innovation, and then they have events coming up. So they have one coming up, in early June for World Environment Day. That's looking at net gain. And if you're a chartered environmentalist, you normally get to attend their events for free. CEnv also does a fair amount of environmental policy work as a partner of the IES through forums such as the Environmental Policy Forum. So we did a little bit of analysis recently this month on the percentage of our eligible members who were chartered by the different fields that make up the IES membership. We removed a few of the fields where there was insufficient data. And you'll see that there is a bit of variability between the different fields. Impact assessment has the highest percentage chartered, and I think that's to do with what I was talking about earlier about competence, proving competence in the field. Other things that rank quite highly is sustainability, because this essentially is a qualification about sustainability, so that makes sense. Land condition is 5th there. I think it's probably at the moment the fastest growing. That's partly because it's a fast-growing sector within the IES, but also chartership in general is is part of a pathway towards other qualifications within land conditions, such as the Silk Register and suitably qualified persons. So CEnv is a stopping off point along the way. Smaller numbers in something like waste management, and I think that's to do with the pull of chartered waste manager. We also looked at the proportion of charterships, CSci, CEnv, or both amongst our membership in those different sectors. So CEnv is the more popular across all sectors, but CSci is particularly popular in land condition, education and training, and in air quality. And I wonder whether that's the slightly more scientific nature of some of those topics, but I don't necessarily know that that translates into all of the sectors. But in all sectors as well, there are a significant number who choose to do both charterships. I mentioned earlier that CEnv has a number of its own members, so there are lots of different professional bodies that have chosen to join that organisation, and their primary reason for joining is so that they can award chartered environmentalists. So you can see their logos up on screen there. Some of them would be familiar to you. Apologies to the Nuclear Institute that joined recently. I didn't manage to put this is an old slide, and I didn't put their logo on there. So CEnv has 24 member bodies, I believe. They each will put their own flavour on CEnv. So if you're doing it through the Chartered Association of Building Engineers, they'll be looking at it in a building engineer context. But the idea is that the standard is the same across the whole board. So it has that portability element. So you can transfer your register to any of those organisations once you've qualified through one of them. Science Council is even bigger. I don't think I put all of their logos on there because I couldn't fit them all on. So there's 42 organisations that make up the Science Council, and some of those will be familiar to you within the environmental field, like the Institute of Water or the Energy Institute. And some of them are very far removed from us indeed, some of the healthcare organisations, for example. What has stopped you from completing your chartership so far? Just a quick poll. I'll only leave it open for 30 seconds or so. Okay, so I'm showing the results of that with you. So no surprises. The top one is a lack of time. A second most popular option is unsure of what was involved. So hopefully today will give you a bit of an insight. And also the third most popular is don't know enough about the qualification. So no, actually that's pipped by don't think I'm qualified. So I'll give you a bit more idea around what the entry criteria are in a minute. If I flip back to the presentation, you will see that I predicted the results of the survey that the number one issue is a lack of time. I kind of cheated because we have surveyed people about this before. So inevitably, as we all have very busy work lives, other priorities quite often force out the time that we would like to allocate towards becoming chartered. Also, that there's no deadlines around applying for chartership. If you're going through the self-guided, you can apply any time during year, and I quite often like the Samuel Johnson quote that is work without deadlines means no work at all. And I think that's the case for many of us, that unless we have a deadline about something, we don't get around to doing it. And finally, people struggle with understanding what the competencies are. I feel that if you read them without the aid of some of our guidance or the workshop, they can all seem to be asking pretty much the same thing. So, given those constraints or barriers that there are to becoming chartered, the IS developed a framework a few years back about how we wanted to support our chartership process, and it's built around kind of three concepts that I'll go into a bit more detail around. One is the support that we give members in applying for the chartership. One is the speed with which they can complete it. And finally, it's the rigor of the chartership. So we didn't want to see the first two diminish the third. So they're the three principles and standards that our chartership process is built around. So in terms of support, let me very briefly go through the process of applying for both charterships. The first kind of hurdle that you need to get over is that you have sufficient experience. So that's the 6 years that I talked about earlier, 5 if you have a master's. And why that's in there is because a chartership is a reflective process on what you've done in your career. So it has a set of competencies, and those competencies are generally backwards looking. So you evidence them by talking about projects that you've been involved in at a level where you can influence that project. So there's sufficient experience isn't just about time, it's about at the right level, because for some of the competencies you need to be showing that you're influencing a project and shaping it. So we think that kind of 5 or 6 years is about right to be able to have sufficient experience to reflect on. All of the processes begin with a written application, so the report stage, which is framed around those competencies. So we're expecting you to have written a certain amount under each competency. For the CEnv and sometimes the Seaside, there is then that professional interview that will tend to last around 45 minutes. And that will be done with 2 practicing chartered members who are chartered in the area that you're applying for. So if you're applying for chartered scientists, there'd be 2 chartered scientists interviewing you. And that's a peer review process. And the idea behind that is that some people are very good written communicators, some people are better verbal communicators. And to kind of offer a fail-safe that to make sure that you were the one who actually wrote your application. Some candidates seem to do brilliantly at one and very poorly at others. Most candidates are quite balanced. Each one of those is a hurdle that you have to surmount. They're not looked at in the round. They are different stages. So you have to pass the report stage, you have to pass the interview stage. And then after you achieve your chartership, we require you to submit evidence of your ongoing learning through CPD. So we have a CPD tool on our website, and the expectation is that all chartered members will be recording their CPD annually and submitting it to us, and then 10% of those will be audited to see if they are doing a good balance of CPD, that the CPD that they're doing is at the right level and is professionally relevant, and that they're reflecting upon it. So in terms of additional support that we have as part of that process is we have a mentoring scheme. The mentoring scheme is a recent addition. We've mentored graduates for a very long time indeed, but this is specifically for individuals that are doing the chartership. So that mentoring will come from a member of the IES who themselves is chartered. So they may be able to give you feedback on your report. They may be able to talk through some of the competencies to help you crafting a response. I've known some of the mentors to even do like a mock interview with their mentee to help them practice before the final interview. We also, for around 8 years, have been running a workshop called CEnv in a day. The title is a slight misnomer in the sense that our people who are doing the workshop prepare for the workshop. I think it's about 20 hours is about the average that a candidate spends in preparation for the workshop. And then the workshop really is to help them understand the competencies with the idea that they have a a report that's got to a good stage by the end of the morning, and then they'll be interviewed in the afternoon. It sometimes takes a bit longer to get to the report to the final stage after the workshop, but it really condenses the whole process to 90% of it being within a day, and another 10% being within a few weeks of that. We call it the fastest and most rewarding way to become chartered environmentalist because I think we're unique in running this workshop, and also that's based upon the feedback that we get from candidates who have undertaken it and they've really enjoyed the workshop. They've enjoyed interacting with the facilitator and the other four professionals who are undertaking the qualification at the same time. We limit our workshops to just 5 people, and the reflective process that they go through in that workshop has been very valuable to individuals. So it is a recommended route, and I would say probably around 90% of people qualifying for chartered environmentalist through the IES go through that workshop, and we have much higher pass rates for the people going through the workshop. With the workshop, I would say it's around kind of 75% would pass first time round. With the self-guided route, I think it is probably less than 50%, and that's due to the support that they get during the day. Probably worth mentioning at this point that when I talk about passing and not passing, the IES, as part of that supportive process, don't really view it as pass and fail. There's 100% of pass, but if a candidate does not meet some of the criteria, either through the report or the interview, they become what we call referred. They will get several rounds of feedback on that report to tell them where they can improve it, and sometimes it's just that they haven't covered enough detail in the report or the interview. Sometimes it is that they haven't got the experience yet, so we'll send them away with very in-depth feedback to go off, get a particular bit of a particular skill or knowledge, it might be managing a team or something, and come back and interview on that competency again in the future. We don't charge for that. There are limitations to the number of times you can resubmit, but you can do a number of times, normally up to 3 times, without there being an additional fee. So that might remove the fear for some of you of not passing the first time round. It's a supportive process, as I say. And my colleagues are helpfully putting a few links in the chat box there if you want to learn a bit more about the mentoring scheme or the workshops. And there's a few more details on that slide about the workshop itself. So it's a 1-day workshop, maximum of 5 candidates per workshop. We send you lots of pre-workshop documents in advance to help you prepare. And we have 2 workshops every month in different locations. Used to primarily do them in London. Now it tours around the country. So this year I've been to Bristol and Birmingham to do assessment. That gives you an idea of the process. If you're doing it through the workshop, you apply for IS membership, then you apply for the workshop, and you're sent the pre-workshop documents. You fill in some of those, come with a draft report to the workshop, complete the report in the morning and have the interview in the afternoon. Then post the workshop, there may be a bit of tidying up of the report to get it up to standards, and you also need to send in a witness statement. So the witness statement is just a supporting statement that one of your colleagues or line managers signs off to say that the content of the report, the work that you talk about, was undertaken by you. So it's a final check. There's some feedback that we've had from the workshop. This is all genuine feedback from individuals that have undertaken the workshop. And there's some dates of forthcoming workshops in London that are coming up. So 17th of June, 18th of June, 15th of July, 16th of July, 22nd of August and 23rd of August. You'll see the regularity of them. I think there's a few spaces still left on the 17th and 18th of June. So if you're really enthused after today's webinar, you could be chartered by the end of next month. So there's an ambition for some of you. William asked, does a witness statement need to be by a CEnv? No, it doesn't. It has to be by someone who can validate that the work that you talk about in your report was undertaken by you. So our preference is for a line manager. Sometimes that's quite difficult for people who are working for themselves as self-employed. Sole traders, so in that case we have to go to a couple of their clients to validate it, or ex-members of staff that they've worked with in the past. CSci process, very similar, so it's probably not worth getting into any detail around that. This shows the kind of CSci and CM self-guided route. You again have to be an IS member first, and then essentially the difference is that you're filling in the competency report without any aid from us. So you're doing it off your own back, and it might be that you read the guidance on the website and you feel confident enough to do that. And then the report will be validated and assessed by a couple of our assessors, and then once that stage is passed, we will then invite you for an interview. We're hoping to launch a workshop for chartered scientists in the autumn, which will be very similar really to the CEnv workshop. There'll be slightly more candidates because of that lack of requirement to have an interview, means that the workshop bit can go on a bit longer throughout the day. Here's a link for registering your interest in CSci. It's something that our members have been calling for a number of years. So I should imagine the first few workshops will be quite popular, and I think one of my colleagues will probably drop that link into the chat box, so you can click through on it. The speed element, I've heard with some other organisations it can take up to 18 months to complete the process, which we feel is unacceptable really. We recognise that some of our members might need to do the chartership very quickly. They might have a particular bid that they need to be chartered for. There might be a real pressure at work around a promotion that they need to get chartered. So we want to complete the process as quickly as possible. So we have regular assessment panels. So if you're doing the self-guided, we tend to tack them on in the morning when our assessor's down for a CEnv in a day. So the regularity of those self-guided assessments are as frequent as the workshops are as well. We also make use of video conferencing for interviews. There is no obligation for you, if you're going through the self-guided route, to come into the office. You can do it remotely. Having done assessments, I do prefer them face-to-face. You get a bit, you can kind of pick up on visual language between the assessors and the candidate a bit better. But there's plenty of reasons why you might want to use video conferencing, for example, working abroad or having a disability that means you can't come into the office. So that very much is a service that we use. Also, we want to keep our carbon emissions low. So if you're traveling from a long way, it might be just the most sustainable option. In terms of rigor, having done this process for so many years and being one of the most active members in terms of recruitment of new CMs and CSci, is that we have mentored hundreds of candidates through the CM and CSci process. And we have a team of highly trained assessors that are there to ensure that there is high standards but fair standards of assessment. And there's plenty of kind of internal auditing of that to ensure that those standards remain constant across the board. Also, a number of our trustees and myself are and have been in the past auditors for the Science Council and CEnv, so we have a good idea of what the standards are across the piece, across the full membership bodies, and we make sure that we always at least equal, if not exceed, those standards. So that's it from me. You can see some of my contact details there. I hope that's offered a bit of clarity around the difference between CEnv and CSci, and also the support that we as an institution offer in terms of both of those charterships. If anything isn't clear, and if you're struggling at all in understanding anything to do with chartership, I would always urge you to email or call the office, and our staff really understand this process. You know, it's one of the key services of the IES, so don't be shy, kind of pick up the phone, tell us about your personal situation, and you know, we'll be able to give you some additional advice to what you've heard today that may be more bespoke to your particular situation. Very friendly bunch. I hope today's been useful, and I look forward to some of you applying for chartership. Good luck with your next steps.